probably around 300 BC to the end of the warring state. Okay, so let's take about 1 minute to go over the background and then just kind of review. So basics, we talk about this time. So to answer Alex's question, when is later Mohism probably happened between Confucius and Mencius, right? So that's 500, let's make you use rough number. So 400 something, but later Mohism probably happened during this time, you know, before the Qin dynasty, all right? Then we all know the ancient China have a the warring state, so-called the Han school, and we cover all the major schools. Okay, so to answer the question about timeline, okay, Mohism happened about it's on a very early time, but the so-called the later Mohism, it should be around this time, Xunzi around this time. Okay, but we don't know, and we even don't know who is the writer. So, and the entire Mohism book is no way written by one person because it's huge and cover different subject. So just show a few maps, and the people probably already see it. I just showed, no need to go to detail. Basics we are talking about in the so-called spring and autumn time. There's so many states in China, in that land. There's so many states, but after 200-300 years, it consolidate to 7 major states. So that's the time. So later, Mohism probably happened during this time, spring and autumn, the later part, and then or early this part. That's the Mohism start to talk about their Mohism's philosophy. And then later Mohism probably happened to the very end of this one, so-called the warring state. Right? And then after warring state, around 220 BC, that's the time the entire China got united to one state called Qin dynasty, and later on become Han dynasty. So I don't have to show this one more time, but basics, I just put a chart, you know, for all the people together. So Mohism, I consider him as progressive and have a religious sense, okay, compared to others. I think we don't have to do that. So that's just the general background on that time. And then if you have any question, just please ask the question. I will soon know, but if you have a question, that's fine. That's time to answer, to ask a question. Before I will spend another few minutes to go over what's Mohism's major philosophy. Okay, so you will refresh your mind. Okay. Okay, Mozi, okay, we list usually, okay, Eastern and the West usually is list the 10 major theses his teaching. Okay, so evaluating the worthy, okay, that's related to the natural state. We will talk about next week. Agreement with the superior, and then impartial love. That's the most important part, which is impartial love, which is different than Confucius' teaching, okay? And against the military aggression, frugality in expenditure, and frugality in funeral, the will of heaven, elucidation, the ghost, because they believe ghosts, just different than Confucius, against the entertainment, against the music, against the fatalism, okay? They believe God, but they against the fatalism. So their teaching is very this worldness, okay? Even they believe ghost. That's the major idea about the Mohism. Any question? Okay, let's talk about first. Let's talk about the difference. I think we showed this one last time, but I would like to do one more time in a little bit different angle. So we all know the major school, Taoism and Confucianism. Okay, Mohism is arguing against Confucius, and the Confucius name has been mentioned in the writing. So I summarize, basically Feng YouLan summarized 4-point Mohism's criticism on Confucianism. So first, the Confucianists do not believe in the existence of heaven and the ghost. So the reason, Mohist argument is this one will make the ghost and heaven unhappy. Okay, that's the first thing he argued against. Second, Mohists argue Confucius insists on elaborate funerals and practice 3 years of mourning on the death of a parent. The result is wasteful. Confucius famously say, if one of your parents died, father or mother, you have to mourn for 3 years. And Confucius focus on the funeral and all the rituals. Even Confucius reject to a luxury service, luxury ritual, but he insists the ritual is very important. So that's the part Mohism is against. Number 3, Confucius stress on the practice on music, okay? Because music is part of ritual, and Confucius thinks that's very important, okay? So again, Mohism is against it because the reason is simple: it's totally useless and wasteful. Number 4, Confucius believe in predetermined fate. Okay, so this one is a little bit different because the Confucius he believed the mandate of heaven, so-called Tianmin. Confucius' idea is a lot of things we can do, but a lot of things, the result we cannot expect it. So that's heaven decided. But in Mohism point of view, is Confucius is lazy because they just let heaven decide. So Mohism's idea is more aggressive. Basically, Mohism will do all your effort to help other people. So based on these 4 points, okay, Mohism is against Confucius' teaching. So that's the case, argue against Confucius. Okay. So any question on this part? I think we already covered this one last time, and then if you do it the second time, you probably have a different thought. Alex, please.
Yeah, so I have one question regarding the second one. I heard from some source that when it comes to the funerals and especially the elaborate funerals and practices, it's usually the Confucianists, back in the day that would host these funerals and practices for the families. Is that correct? And then the second one, I have a question regarding number 4, which is Confucius, Mohist, I think suggested, I don't know, knowing is it knowing Ming? That's what I read in the text. Knowing Ming, is it how do you translate into Chinese?
Understand the heavens. Okay. So a very good question. Okay, and these 2 questions actually is especially number 4, Tianmin. Okay, I think Rubana. Okay, she's not here today. We discussed about the talking about this subject as a whole entire meetup about Confucius or Chinese understand about the heaven and the heaven's mandate, how to understand heaven. That's a little bit religious sense, and then so that's a big subject. So basically, the subtle difference is this: Confucius believe. Okay, first, Confucius doesn't want to talk about ghost, and he famously said, okay, if you don't know this word, okay, how do you know other world? Okay, if you don't know this life, how do you know after death? So he focused on today's world, And he rejects to talk about the strange thing, ghost, spirit, this kind of, he doesn't want to talk about this one. Doesn't mean he doesn't believe, he just say, I don't want to talk about this. And about the heavens mandate, okay, Tianming, his point, I talk about Confucius, his point is you do whatever you have to do, doing well, but the result, that heaven decides, because it's not you can do. So he's talking about this, Confucius talk about this, because during that time, a lot of war, Confucius kind of have some idea, okay, promote the ritual. He want to go back to the ancient political system. He knows he has very little possibility to be successful, but he still work very hard. He talked about this Tianming, the mandate of heaven is based on his effort. Okay, not very similar to Indian concept of karma, right? You have your own karma, okay, but the result, the fruit, is not what you can decide. Very similar to this part. Another concept Alex mentioned is 知命, which means understand the heaven. So that means you have to know your limit, okay? Which part you can do, which part you cannot do. It's not like a Western sense as theology to understand the nature of God. That's a different concept. So Confucius thinking about 知命, knowing heaven. If we put the equation, we put the heaven is equal to Western God. Okay. Understand God, understand heaven in Confucius meaning means understand what I can do and what I cannot do. Western sense of knowing God probably means more on the nature of God, okay, the providence. So that's a little bit different. And then that's why Mohists criticize on Confucius about heaven is a little bit biased, or we will call mistaken, or probably mistaken on purpose. So we don't know, but basically that's his argument. And then another question, Alex talking about the ritual service, the funeral service. Yes, yes. Even it's a hard question. If today let's use Taiwan as an example. Today's funeral service basics is based on Buddhism and Taoism, okay, religious side. But does they have the Confucian's flavor on that? My answer is yes, because it's the foundation. You know, it's like your parent, what kind of ritual you have, what kind of respect, what kind of ritual you have to do as a son, and as a daughter, as a son-in-law, as a daughter-in-law, as a grandson, granddaughter-in-law, as a granddaughter. They're all different. Everybody's the role. How do you pay respect to the death? They are different. Okay, depend on the relationship. How about if your son passed away and the father to mourn your son? They have a different way to do it. So this kind of flavor is heavily influenced by Confucius' teaching. So that's my long answer for short answer. Okay. But unfortunately, that's a little bit longer. So any other question on this one? Oh, we have a lot of hands up, and then Karen and the Madeline. Karen, please.
I think this might be a question that you're going to get to later, so feel free to postpone it. But on number 3, the notion of useless. I remember last year we had a session on the story about the butcher and the knife or something, the cleaver, and the concept of uselessness came up. And I think we've heard in other sessions even this year about this debate about whether or not uselessness is to be desired or whether or not you have to find a balance between the useful and the useless. So is this a reoccurring theme sort of in the culture of the time and all philosophy about what's worth doing? Or is this sort of very specific to the Mohists, sort of almost utilitarian look. They have a very specific definition of what the end goal is, which is like benefiting.
Oh, yeah.
So is it sort of very specific to that, or is it kind of tied into a thing that keeps coming up, which is, what's the right thing to do?
Yeah, thank you, Karen. I think you asked a question, and I probably have to think a lot. But so-called useless, I think that's a two kind of useless we are talking about, and you put them together. You see, I never think about this way. Okay, to quickly answer your question, Mohists argue against the Confucius on the wasteful, useless, this kind of thing. It's a utilitarian argument, because this one is no benefit to other people, okay, to the world, to the state, okay. That's his argument, okay. If you know the people already dead, why you are spend money to doing that? Music, what's the purpose of that, okay? That's no use, no actual use. When he talk about useful, he talk about profit. When you talk about the other kind of useless and usefulness and uselessness, that's in the Zhuangzi, which is Taoism's argument, talking about a person, me, I should be a useful person. It means I can be employed or I am unemployed, right? So example is a tree. If the tree is very useful, that means the tree is straight, is solid, so very easy to be cut down. Okay, able to show this kind of usefulness. So he's talking about this kind of usefulness is dangerous, right? So if you can see in the company, right? So if you are a good person, you are honest, you work harder, then your boss just abuse you. So turn out you burn out. Right? But some people are totally useless, but between the some way, so the too difficult job, and traveling, and your boss will say, oh, okay, don't ask another guy to do it. So he kind of get an easy life. So that's a two sense of useful.
Okay.
So thank you to mention this.
Yeah.
I don't think about this way, in general, but that's a great way to talk about. Madeline, please.
Yes, I was looking at this and remembering something which I thought was from a previous section, but actually is from the one of the introductory sections of the book itself, which is chapter 3, the origins of the schools. So basically what happened was that the Zhou dynasty fell apart, and all the people who had worked in the court went out and had to get work. So they went out and taught, and they founded these different schools of thought. I hope you will correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm just going to read what these things are very briefly. Those of the Tao. So I think what the later Mohists are criticizing, this ritual music, the funerals, the 3 years of mourning, all of the learning, the things they don't like, these are basically court rituals that have been transplanted into the schools of thought. So those of the Taoist school had their origin in the official historians. Those of the Yin Yang school had their origin in the official astronomers. Those of the legalist school had their origin in the Ministry of Justice. Those of the School of Names had their origin in the Ministry of Ceremonies. Those of the Mohist school had their origin in the Guardians of the Temple. Those of the Diplomatist school had their origin in the Ministry of Embassies. The Eclectic school had their origin in the Counselors, drawing from both the Confucianists and the Mohists. The Agricultural school of thought had their origin in the Ministry of Soil and Grain. And then there's one they seem to regard as a bit shaky. It's called the School of Storytellers, which had their origin in the petty offices and basically picked up street gossip and brought it back to the court.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, that's in Feng YouLan's writing, yes. And that's not the only way to explain it. I think they have many scholars talking about. In general, they all the same. But Feng YouLan's writing is much more specific. In general, people agree Taoism is start from the historian. Okay, because Taoism, because and the Confucius doing the ritual, and then Mohism doing the ceremony. But most of people believe Mohism is from the craftsman group, not from the aristocracy. Okay, but we can go over this one. When we proper time, we can this one and have a different discussion. But thank you, Madeline, to share this part. Yeah, that's the origin of how does the school origin. But actually, I think the situation is not like that easy, right? This kind of job become this school, this kind of job become this school. But another angle to look at is they are respond. That's my view. Is more on they respond to what happened during that time. That's why I like to show the map, like they have over many hundred states reduced to during the war, become a 7th state. So you can imagine the environmental change. It probably will cause a lot of people will start to respond during this situation. So that's another way to look at, instead of top down, to look at from the aristocrat and how to become philosophy. Another way to look at it is there's a lot of people, they are educated and they have idea how to resolve today's problem, probably ambition to be achieve something during that time. So they come with the different thought, school of thought. Okay, so let's move on. Alex, please.
Yeah, just a quick question. Why did Mohism, out of all the artistic displays, such as, dancing or music or painting, why did he pick specifically on music? Is there a short answer to that?
Okay, yeah, because the music, because the music is a part of ceremony. In Confucius teaching, music is a ceremony. But I don't think that time have a painting or other entertainment. So music is a big thing and expensive. I think that's why he picked up music. And he used the word, if you know Chinese word, de, right? Yue. It means music, but in general sense, it probably means all the art. Right?
Yes, I see what you entertainment. Okay.
Basically, it's all the entertainment. Some translation will call against the music. But I think that I will use it against the entertainment. So because music is the major part, I don't think they have of course they have painting and
right. But like for Confucianism, music is used mainly for rituals.
That's right.
So it's is it really spoil the people's mind? I mean, you understand my connection here?
Yeah. Okay. Confucius talking about this, the music. He talked about certain kind of music. The good music, Confucius said, okay, he listened to a very good music, and then after that, the song, the melody, still lingering around the house for 3 months. Okay, and for I don't know, for 3 months or how long, when he eat meat, okay, means delicious food, he doesn't taste the flavor of meat. That means his mind is still in the music. So that's how Confucius described what a good music. Okay, he also against certain kind of music. He said the music from a state of zheng, okay, is terrible. Okay, so he kind of like the person who against the pop music. He said like, oh, only praise the classic music. So I think that's the Confucius position on music. Okay, that's back to the Mohism. Okay, let's go to, and you probably will see what's the reason we have to separate the later Mohism and the main Mohism teaching. I showed this one last month about the book. It's probably during that time, that's the humongous writing, right? 71 chapters. And each one probably, or even only a few hundred words, I think. I will assume about 1,000 characters on each chapter. So it's huge compared to other writing. Okay, that's huge. So if we go through basis, he talk about his philosophy, self-cultivation, and arguments like condemnation of music, anti-fatalism, anti-Confucianism, and the later part talk about technical, how to build the city gate, and how to defend against, different kind of, we call the end rush. That means use a group of people to the regular people to swarm, into the city. So they talk about a lot of detailed things. But if you look at this book, 41, 42 to 45, to 45. For this 6th chapter, their writing is different. Okay, so that's why this part is very different than the rest of the writing. This one talk about pure philosophical system. So let me go a little bit detail on this. So this 4th chapter, okay, it worth to talk about a little bit detail, will make your reading clear. In Chinese tradition, this 6th chapter is not called Mozi, called Mo Jing, okay, which is direct translation is Mohist canons, Mo Jing. But let's talk about this word a little bit, Jing. In general, Jing means canons, like tradition, Confucius teaching. The Jing means the classic text. Okay, you have to read, and I think same as in the Western world, they have some scripture and some text considered canon. But I will argue a little bit on this word, because Jing, this word means because the Chinese has been using silk for a long time. So Jing means the silk. When you make the silk, make a cloth, the vertical line, that means Jing. Okay, horizontal called Wei. Okay, so I think the reason called Jing means not necessarily canon. That means something straight, just a line. So because logic is a Western word, there's no logic word. Some word, equivalent word called logic in China. So they probably use Jing as logic. That means something straight. Okay, going following. Okay, so they call Mo Jing because it's logic. So that's my understanding. But let's use the common word as canon. Okay. So to avoid misunderstanding, that's a little bit I like to talk about. So this 6th chapter separate, organized very well. 40 and 41, so-called the canon 1. Okay. 40 and 40, canon 1 and the canon 2, Jing Sang, Jing Xiang. The Chinese use up and down, so that's a 2 chapter. But 42 is the commentary, explanation of 40. And the 43 is the commentary for 41. So a lot of today's writing, a lot of the compiler, they just combine these two together, 40 and 42, 41 and 43 together, combine together. Even you go to C text, if you don't have to read both 40 and 42 because they just combine together. So you will see on the first line about 10 words talking about something, and then second line is from chapter 42. It's one-to-one match. So usually we combine together. So we reduce 6 chapter to 4 chapter. So we have a canon 1. So from now on, I mentioned canon 1. That means chapter 40 and 42, we combine together. So canon 1 is included 100 terms, okay, just kind of a glossary, okay, what's the filial pious, what's the ren, what's the trustworthy, what means profit, what means, so it's just like a dictionary, okay, 100 words, okay, then just make a clear definition on that. Canon 2, which include the chapter 41 and 43, okay, they have 83, okay, and almost, I think it's 80 of them, they end with the reason is given under something. So kind of explain what is pure reason. I almost want to call this one is the same as Kant's critique of pure reason. It just try to go into what's the reason on that. But of course, it's not like 800 pages. It's only have 83 paragraph, very short paragraph, talk about different thing about reason. I will give some example on that. So that's the canon 1 and the canon 2. Then chapter 44 and the 45, they called major illustration and the minor illustration. Said again, the word 取, okay, means take. You just pick up something. So illustration is a good translation. Basic means example. So basics, these two chapters is talking about the philosophical example, philosophical argument based on canons. So so-called the major basis argument about the Mohists philosophical based on canon 1 and 2. And the minor illustration basics is talking about dialectics. Okay, so that's the organizer for these 6 books. And then if that's why when I read the Feng YouLan's chapter, I also find out a little bit difficult because Mohism writing, I talk about later Mohism, Mo Jing, is very systematic, but the logic is on the logic part is the systematic. But when you argue with different school, you have to go to different jump around in different chapters. And that's why, you have a 2 system overlap. That's why it's difficult to read. So today, I'm going through this 4 chapter or 6 chapter, just like reading a book. And then next week, when we use this idea to organize with 3 main subjects, one is epistemology, and another one utilitarian, and then state of nature argument, then you will become very clear, that's the logic part, that's the argument part. Okay, so that would be, that's the reason I separate these 2. Fred, you have a question?
When we discussed the school of names, as I recall, I might have the pronunciation wrong, the term, there was an evocative term that was used, chi, for universals. And you had mentioned a term when you were just discussing this about examples or illustrations. Was that the same term?
Yes. Okay. Oh, you talk about illustration? No, that's a different term. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So when you talk about, I will mention what you talk about because probably a little bit confusing, but that's why it's reading become difficult on this chapter because it must written in the later time. So all the previous philosopher has been talked about, but they didn't mention the name. They didn't mention, the writing only mentioned Confucius, not other person, but they talk about their philosophy. So that's become very difficult to read this this text. So I think it's the difficult part for the people in Western because you have to know other schools, the philosophy. But also difficult for Chinese reader because you have to know the Western philosophy, Western logic, because they kind of mix. So this part has been known for very difficult reading in Chinese history. I probably very few people spend time studying this part. If I have no question, I'm going on for, okay, since the conclusion from Feng YouLan, I think is important. That's why I decided to put the conclusion first. I'm going to read this part. In criticizing the Taoists, the later Mohists point out the certain logical paradoxes that have also appeared in Western philosophy. So we are going to mention how Mohists argue against the Confucianism, but we will see how Mohists argue against the Taoism. It is only with the development of a new logic in recent time that this paradox has been solved. Thus, in contemporary logic, the criticism made by the later Mohists are no longer valid. Yet, it is interesting to note that the later Mohists were so logically minded more than any other school of ancient China. They attempted to create a pure system of epistemology and logic. So I think the important is talk about the pure system. To my understanding, that's probably the only one totally separate. They start when they argue something. There's some advantage to just separate from the real world. They just talk about logic by itself. So that's the difficult part and also the interest part of the later Mohism writing. So any comment or any you want to talk about this conclusion? So let's move on. Okay, so I'm going to, for the rest of today, I'm going to go through these four, basically six, I reduced to 4 chapters. I'm go through these 4 chapters, and then we will see. Of course, I cannot go all of them, but I'm going to pick up what Feng YouLan mentions in the whole book, and then we will just kind of like sample a few paragraphs from each book. So first, Canon 1, that's the very first line of the Canon 1. He talks about gu, which is in general in Chinese, gu means because. Talk about the if you say something because, talk about the reason, the cause, the efficient cause. So I think nobody appreciate. I'm probably the person who appreciates this writing the most, because if you know, I'm doing the Dao De Jing translation. These words happen all the time, and then I realized in Chinese, especially ancient Chinese, this word gu, cause, has many meanings, and then it's sometimes very difficult and confused because you don't know it means because or means therefore, or either way. Okay. And then I find out this chapter, they explain very well in the way. So you will see, if you have been with me reading other Chinese philosophical writing, you will see the writing is very different here. So first, the first line of the chapter 1 just explain this. The cause is what it must get before it will come about. Basically talk about P, gu, Q, gu is this word, okay? So it talk about gu is a cause, but it's not necessary cause, okay? Because they have another thing they call the minor cause, okay? His writing is, having this, it will not necessarily be so. Lacking this, necessarily, it will not be so, okay? So basically talk about if, let's say P, U, Q, D, okay? So basically talk about Q is true, P is not necessarily true, or if Q is false, and P must be false. So I don't know how many of you interested in the truth table. I just put the truth table here. Basics, that's he is talking about. And if we use modern logic, okay, analytical to analyze, we know when we say P, gu, Q, doesn't happen all the time in all Chinese writing. If it means minor cause, so basics gu have to translate as therefore, hence. So in this case, gu is not efficient cause. It's a therefore, that means a necessary condition. So that's the one thing he explained. Okay, so that's one thing. And then second thing, it talk about major cause, which is having this, it will necessarily be so. Lacking this, necessarily it will not be so. If I put the truth table, that means if. That means it's a sufficient and necessary condition. That means P will cause Q, Q will cause P. So whenever, especially I do a lot in Dao De Ji, whenever I see gu, okay, it could be having the three kind of meaning on that. So they all call gu, but I think it's only Mohists writing here make it clear. When you say gu, they have the three kind of situation, and I think that's wonderful. And then I never see anybody mention this for thousands of years. Madeline. Yeah.
Yes, well, I got a bit muddled in this part of the reading. I was the example of a major cause that came to mind was mitochondria. If you have mitochondria, you are an animal. If you do not have mitochondria, you are not an animal. But I couldn't think of an example for a minor cause. And I'm wondering if you, Jason, or someone else could just give a simple example of what a minor cause would be.
Okay, minor cause actually is not a cause. Okay, it's therefore. That means, you know, if you it's not because, it means therefore. So the difficult part in Chinese, especially ancient writing, is they didn't separate because and therefore. That's the problem. So necessary condition. One condition is, let's say, breathing is a necessary condition of living people, right? If it's a living people. So, no, living, breathing is sufficient condition. Okay, let's put it this way. Living, okay, let me see. Okay, put it this way. Breathing is the necessary condition. Well, stop breathing is the necessary condition for the dead people. So that's wrong. Anybody have a better example can help me?
How about if horses exist, then it's not necessary that Bob is a horse. But if horses don't exist, then Bob can't be a horse.
Horse, Bob.
Yeah. So it's necessary for horses to exist, but that doesn't mean, so if horses exist, it doesn't mean that any particular animal is a horse. But if horses don't exist, then we know that this particular animal, Bob, is not a horse, right?
Yeah, that's another way to look at it.
I guess I'm trying to just plug in. Having this, it will not necessarily be so. Lacking this, necessarily, it will not be so. So,
Fred, you have a better idea to explain?
Yeah, here's another example of follow up on Madeline's, because in fact, mitochondria are in plants as well. Animals and plants have mitochondria. However, only plants have chloroplasts. So, so you say that chloroplasts are a sufficient determinant of plants. Plants have lots of things, necessarily have lots of things besides chloroplasts that make them a plant, but they have to have chloroplasts. And so it's sufficient. And so it would seem to be like that's a minor clause.
Which is a necessary condition.
Necessary, yes, it's necessary, but not sufficient.
Yes.
Okay, so Fred, you're saying that if plants have both chloroplasts and mitochondria, the chloroplasts would be the major cause and the mitochondria would be the minor cause?
No, I would take the chloroplast as the minor cause in the sense,
Yeah, I think it's the opposite.
maybe
of
I'm not getting this right, but it takes a lot of things to make a plant. It takes more than a chloroplast. It takes, all sorts of cellular structures, nucleus, and so forth. But it does take it does require a chloroplast. So it's a requirement for a plant to have a chloroplast. And therefore, it seems like it's a minor cause.
Okay, well, what about if we just came up with two simple examples, what the minor cause is and what the major cause is, like something that I think I chose something too complicated when I went off into mitochondria. Just something very simple about what the major and minor cause is, concrete examples we could all understand.
Okay, so just 1 minute. Let me try one more time. Okay, sorry, I failed. I thought about this question and then I thought I was clear, but probably my brain got some problem. So let me try one more time. Give me one more chance. Okay. You need air, right? And then the people can live. Nobody can live without air. Okay, we know that. So air, the fresh air, okay, the oxygen is the sufficient condition. It's the necessary condition for people to live. Okay, so that means, can I say necessary? Is a necessary condition for people to live, right? So that's the minor cause. In another way, we can say, when I see people living, that means they have air. So people living is the sufficient condition for air. But air, okay, fresh air, oxygen, is the necessary condition for the people live. In another way, you cannot live, okay, without air. But with air, you don't necessarily live, right? Because it's too hot, too cold, you may die. So that's the minor cause, which means the necessary condition. So we will say air, cool, living, right? Because, but we will say living, okay? We see people living, therefore they have air. Okay? Because that's why we call it the minor cause. Okay? In English, that means therefore, hence, okay, so, okay. Major cause, which is different, that means necessary and sufficient. So habit, right? If you, habit is not the right example, but something like, okay, a brain, right? Brain death means no brain wave, right? So that's a necessary and the sufficient condition. If you are brain dead, that means you have no brain wave, okay, when you do the equipment. If you have no brain wave, that means you are brain dead. So this one is either way. If P is Q's, P is Q's major cause, then Q also P's major cause, which is bidirectional. So that's two different kind of cause. And then when we just say cause, that means, okay, so that's the difference between the minor and the major. I hope it make a little bit clear. So, Madeline, does it make it clear or confused?
Somewhat clearer. It's a little bit easier to understand when we just stick with the Chinese terms. I know a lot of people are familiar with Western philosophy, but I'm working my way through that as well.
Okay, so I probably have to put this one on hold, you know. So
how about,
go ahead.
how about having three sides is a minor cause of something being a right triangle, but having three sides and a 90-degree angle is a major cause of something being a right triangle.
So,
Like that.
all right, so I think that's a stop here for further explanation. I think every explanation will confuse in some way. So if people have a different subject, let's talk about, we really have to move on. Alex and Brian. Alex.
Oh, I think I would prefer that we move on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because not necessarily everybody interested on this part. Brian, please. Brian?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I'm happy to move on. I just point out one thing, the difference between set theory and causation. And I don't know, I'd have to think about the difference, but we're talking set theory here mostly.
Yes, that's yeah. So okay, next week when we talk about epistemology, we probably will face the same thing again, and that's different. I don't expect everybody get clear understand on this part, but if you got the flavor of the ancient Chinese and the West, they overlap on this part, and they have a subtle difference. I think that's the purpose of today's meeting. So.
Actually, I'm so sorry. I want to make a quick example, and I want to take Jason as example, right? So Jason, because of the vase, you hit the vase. You were, had a result in the hospital. If that's the cost, that's the major cost of you being in the hospital. Now, the minor cost is that even though the vase is there, but it doesn't mean that you have to be necessarily, injure yourself with it. But without the vase being there, it's impossible for you to result yourself in the hospital. Therefore, the vase is important as a cause of your injury, but even if it's there, it doesn't mean that you would resolve your injury. It has to be there.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's do this. Let me assign this one as a homework. Let's do this one. Okay, so minor cause is the necessary condition. Okay, and then major cause is sufficient and the necessary condition. Keep this one in mind, and then let's go back and to think about a good example, and then we can talk about this.
Okay, so minor cause means that you might need more than one minor cause for the thing to be so, and major cause means you just definitely need that.
Okay, I think that's the translation problem. Okay, so forget about major, minor, the meaning of major, minor. Just totally replace as necessary condition and sufficient and the necessary condition. Nothing with major, minor. I think that's a confusing part. Because nothing with major. It's not like I get hurt. I went to hospital. The major cause is this. The minor, no, nothing about major, minor. Just necessary condition and the sufficient and the necessary condition. Totally in the Western term. That's why I make this truth table here. Okay. So I think it's the major and the minor. Chinese call 小 and 大. That causes most people confused, but it's nothing with major, minor, just the term. So let's consider this one assignment. So, okay, let's move on. Canon 1, the very first line, okay, is 故. They talk about 故. Then they have another 99 part. I just picked some, and then we will cover a few more next time. Okay, if you were in Confucius learning, okay, you will see how difficult, right? When you talk about 人, talk about 义, talk about 孝, which is all kind of virtue, okay, and a lot of term, okay. So it's very westernized or very modern in later Mohists writing. He put the whole canon 1, okay, put 100 terms and make it clear definition, okay, on that. So 故 is the very first one, that's cause, okay, and then they have others. So I just picked something it mentioned in the Feng YouLan's book, and we also mentioned in other. I will assume people are familiar with this term in different schools. There must be the common words. So during that time, later Mohism, the writer, already realized these words confuse people. So they try to make a clear definition. So first one is talk about 人, which is being mentioned in all schools. And Confucius analyzed 10,000 characters, and they mention Ren for 100 times. And Confucius disciple keep asking what's the meaning of Ren. Confucius answer 100 times, 100 times, many times, never clear. And then Mohists just might make it clear. That's his definition. Ren, benevolence, is to love individually. Yi, righteousness, okay, is to doing something, doing the beneficial. Okay, is to doing is, oh, sorry for this, to doing something be beneficial. Zong, which is loyalty, is to benefit your ruler. That means Zong, loyal. Okay. Xiao is Confucius talking about all the time. Filial piety is to benefit your parents. Xin, trustworthy, okay, is the words agree with the thought or your intention. Yong, courage or bravery, is that by which intent is daring. Li, which is benefit, is redefined Li. Okay, benefit is what one is pleased to get. Gong, which means achievement. Okay, means benefit the people. Okay. So that's the way he defined every virtual word in the Canon 1. So it's that's the how clear it defined. Any thought on this part? So let's move on. So in the Canon 1, they have another word he defined, same as good. Okay, I hope this one not cause confusion on this one. So he mentioned there's a sentence he called tong. This word has been used many times. Sameness. He said, tong, chong, ti, he, lei. That means tong has 4 meanings. Okay, the same words tong. Okay, so first meaning is identity. I use Feng YouLan's translation. Identity. That means there being 2 names, but one actuality in the sameness of identity. Okay. Remember last week? Last week we talked about name and actuality, and that's Fred just mentioned about shi. That's a subject and a predicate. Okay. So that means a subject and a predicate. If the same subject with 2 predicates, okay, these 2 predicates they call identity. Okay. That's the first meaning. Second meaning means unity. That means part and the whole relationship. Okay. On the first meaning, I would like to use, okay, just 1 minute. Okay. So that means not there's the same material, they call unity. Okay. Number 3, coexistence. That means they are in the same place at the same time. That also means tong, both occupying the room in the sameness of togetherness. Number 4, in the same genus, generic relations. That means they are from the same kind. Okay, so in Chinese they all call tong. They are the same. So the example is this. If the first tong, that's I pick up the example. We say agreement. That's tong yi. That means your opinion are identical. Another way we call it is fellow citizen. Okay, 同胞. Okay, that means you are belonging, okay, to the same government or the same country. You have the same belonging. Togetherness, 同学, that means classmate. That means you are studying at the same time in the same place. Okay, that means 同学, that's classmate. Another kind of tong means similar. It's not like identical. They are kind of the same, belong to the same kind. In Chinese called lei tong. Okay. So that's why he make it clear tong, okay, is 4 meaning. And then the reason he do it, he want to argue with against other philosophers. So any question or anything I'm missing or anything, anybody want to ask question or give a further example? No, it's clear. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so One thing I mentioned, if you are in the early, I think Pin talking about the 大同, that's a very important teaching in the Chinese Confucius teaching. Just quickly remind everyone on this one. This one is, I think Pin make a presentation about the 大同. Okay, so this one is, if just to remind everyone, this one is Confucius' utopia argument. Okay, he talking about the basically talking about when the great Tao is prevail, and he start to describe. Okay, and then the man, the woman, the elder, the younger, they all in the right place. Everybody do it when the goods left on the front. There's no steal, no theft, no robbery, and everybody doing a peaceful, nice life. And the Pin's translation, if you pay attention, they call 大同. Okay, so I think during that time we have some discussion about the translation. Okay, 大同 means, if you go back here, the same word, 同, the great 同, okay, great sameness. So what is the meaning of 大同 in the Confucius utopia argument, right? So one way to think about when Pin make a translation, he called it great harmony. Okay. He probably talking about the self, okay, the identity. People are the situation of identity, okay. And some translation as a great unity or great union. That means kind of imply we are in the same country. We are belong to the same government, belong to something. And another translation means great togetherness, which I prefer. That means more individualism. We are together. So the same word have a different meaning, different implication. And then Mohists is talking about this to make it clear. They have two different meanings. And the reason he talking about this, he would like to argue against the school of name and the Taoism teaching, and also Confucius teaching. So he's not using, just use the reason to argue. He also make the linguistic, make it clear, and then use the linguistic way to argue against other schools. Any question or anything you want to add on, or any comment? No? So let's move on. So just another review, okay, why he talking about this? Because Hui Shi, okay, remember, is that last week? Okay, is discussing about the 10 point. One of major things they are, Hui Shi is talking about is so-called loving all things equally. Heaven and earth are one, okay? And he talk about, Hui Shi is talking about many things like heaven is not high, and heaven and the mountain are the same level, okay? So the life and the death are the same. So this one all involves the concept of tong, okay? And then Mohists is arguing, okay? When you say tong or sameness, they have a different meaning. And your argument sounds right because you confuse about the different meaning, different implication of the same word, and that's why he is arguing on this. So basics that I want to cover on the Canon 1. Okay, before we go to Canon 2, okay, which is another different subject. Okay, we are going to. If you have a question, comment, please. Kevin, please.
Yeah, that's very interesting about the last the 大同, right? It's, yeah, 世界之大同. I'm not sure is this connected. I know we other ideology. You think like that's in the Chinese government tried share community with shared future. That's a pretty similar concept. They from there they try pro. Do you see any connection between these? utopian.
You talk about 世界大同.
Yeah, and with that is like the code 人类命运共同体. Yeah, it's you think that connection? I would say, yeah. I
Okay.
would get other or yourself comment.
Yeah, actually, that's a very okay. So you can see this one, right? This tone, this word has been a nice word in Chinese culture, and then Mohists make it clear they have a different meaning. And see, 世界大同 or 命运共同体, what Kevin talking about, they also use the tone, but this tone in different people, different, they have a totally different idea, right? Even in, one thing I like to mention is in Taiwan, okay, the national anthem, okay, also talk about 大同, okay, but are we talking about the same tone? Okay, according to later Mohists definition, right? Definition. Are we talking about the same government, the same people? Are we just talking about all together? Or we talk about we are similar? Okay. So I think that's the way Mohists is argued, and then he is talking about the meaning, the same words, but they have many different meanings. Okay. So that's why people use the same word, and it seems we have the same idea. But when we work together, we find out it's not the same because our definition of tone is different. So that's just my opinion. And I find out this part is wonderful, and that's very important. It probably doesn't resolve the problem, but explain why there's so many problems when we have the same goal, but turn out we don't do the same thing. I think that's my opinion. Okay, so let's move on for the second part of canon. Okay, second part of canon. Okay, so basically talk about reason. So if you go to the text, you will find out they have 83 paragraph, short paragraph. I already said each paragraph just about this long, okay, and plus some commentary, so about double of this long. So it's an 83 point or the 83 sentence. Every sentence end with 说岁在变，岁在其言. Basically translated as the reason is given under something. Okay, so that's the argument on that. So you try to define what is reason, and then what's the purpose of reason, how to use reason. Okay, so I translate. I think Feng YouLan also use the same word. 说 means speak, but here doesn't. I think he means reason. So we'll see. I just pick up 4, 5 from Feng YouLan's book. So first, talk about no winner in an argument is incorrect. Okay. And the conclusion is the reason is given under argument. So this one, he is talking about Zhuangzi, the Taoism, right? Taoism talking about Zhuangzi kind of like debate, but turn out that he want to do is it's the same. Okay, it's no winning. Okay. So that's what he's talking about. All speech is perverse. This sentence is perverse. So we talk about the reason is given under speech. To condemn criticism is perverse. The reason is given under not to condemn. That's how he defined this one. And then he talked about, if we remember, last week we talked about the argument of the hardness and the whiteness. Okay. So he's arguing about the against Gongsun Long, who is belong to the school of names. So the reason is given under dependence, okay, because he is arguing the whiteness and the hardness are dependent each other. Another, he argued about the predicate and the subject and the predicate is something. Sometimes the name is wrong. The reason is given under actuality. Okay, so remember we talk about actuality is, I think, let me show this one. Okay, it will be further explain what's going on. Okay, so I think we show this one, right? In the Western world, we all know we have the subject and the predicate. And then in Chinese, we call actuality and the name. So also the subject is impermanent and concrete and relative. And the name is more absolute, abstract, and permanent. So I use the example as Socrates is a philosopher and this is cat. So this part he is talking about is this one, okay? He talking about if the name Socrates is a philosopher, okay? It says Socrates is sophist, okay? The name is wrong. The reason should be given to the Socrates, which is actuality. That's why he defined the reason is given under the actualities. So that's the way to do it. And they have many of this one. And some of them is very difficult to understand. And some of them, the words are missing. So I did some research. I didn't see a clear, complete translation or interpretation on this chapter. But this chapter has been considered very difficult because it talks about try to define the usefulness or the reason or why we use reason and the purpose of reason. So that's the part on the Canon 2. Question and any comment on this part? No? Okay, so let's move on. Okay, move on the other part, which is the major illustration. Okay. Major illustration is remember we talked about Canon 1 and the Canon 2, okay, which define the words, and the Canon 2 define what's the reason. Then you talk about some example, the major illustration. So I'm going to read this one. I think for YouLan include this one. Obtaining benefit and avoiding harm. Okay, that's the major subject. And when one cuts a finger in order to preserve a hand, this is to choose the greater benefit and the lesser harm. To choose the lesser harm is not to choose harm, but to choose benefit. If on meeting a robber, one loses a finger so as to save one's life, this is benefit. The meeting with the robber is harm. Choice of greater benefit is not a thing done under compulsion. Choice of lesser harm is a thing done under compulsion. The formal means, which means getting the benefit, the greater benefit. The formal means choosing from what has not yet been obtained. You want to get the best profit. And the later, which means you meet a robber, you lost one finger. The later means discarding what one has already been burdened with. So I think that's his argument. I just picked, he has, I think he has 8 different examples to explain, okay, this kind of philosophy use logic. So that's the major illustration. So that's the first part of the illustration. Then we can go to the second part. That's got a little bit complex. Here's the second part, the minor illustration. So again, please try not to think too much as the meaning of the major, minor, okay? Because that's just different thing. Major, he just, this kind of example, he talked about 8 different application or example from the logic. And the minor illustration, he's talking about the dialectics, which is the interest part. Okay. So at the very beginning, he is talking about, I summarize as 8 different reasons, okay, the purpose of doing dialectics. In Greek word, we talk about dialectics. The purpose of dialectics is find the truth. And then in Mohism, the dialectics, I don't know what's the purpose, but it never mentioned about the truth. Okay, that's the thing I noticed. But that's what, and everybody can tell me, does Mohism's interest is finding the truth or not. So that's the question. Before I read this one, Alex, you have any comment?
Yeah, the utilitarian position, the last slide, is it, because I'm reading the Chinese, and I think, and also in the reading, it was referring to Jeremy Bentham, his introduction of the principles of morals and legislation. Because Bentham's writing, it's more about, is it more about government? Because talk about sovereign and righteousness, beneficial, as well as pain and pleasure, almost like reward and punishment. Is this part of the Mohist philosophy, the utilitarian philosophy, actually referring to more or less politics or government?
Okay, thank you for mentioning this. I plan to put this part because I know this one would be the big subject, so I put it one in the next week. And this week we just go to the difficult part, which is logic. Okay, just a quick answer what Alex asked. Okay, first, Jeremy Bentham is a lawyer. So when he writes utilitarians, okay, he is talking about the law, okay, and of course you can argue it's similar to government. That's his purpose. I think that's my personal opinion. Mohists talking about utilitarian basics. He is talking about his religious movement or his social responsibility. I don't see, at least because Mohists never interested to get a government position in the, unlike Confucianism, right? They try to get the government position and even consider working for government is your responsibility to work for government. And Mohists are different. So he probably has no interest, that's just my assumption, no interest to make a law or to create a new government, probably talking about that's the right thing to do and we have to do this way. That's my opinion. So we will have a more discussion on the next week when we talk about utilitarian. So any other comment before we move to the minor illustration? So here, this one also happened on the very beginning of the minor illustration. Okay, so basics, that's the very first slide, talk about the dialectics. So dialectics serve to the following 8 things. Make clear the distinction between right and wrong. Discriminate between order and disorder. Make evident point of similarity and difference. Examine the principles of name and actuality. Differentiate what is beneficial and what is harmful. Remove the doubt and uncertainties. Observe the happening of all things. I think here he's talking about empiricism. Investigate the order and the relation between various judgments, which we talk about criticism. Okay. So that's the 8 points he put in this very concise. I basically translate the word. Okay, not the red one. I'm going to do it later. That's the 8 points he talk about. And I noticed that which I'm interested is in the Plato's writing. Plato mentioned about the truth. They keep want to find the truth, and when they talk about dialectics, okay. But by doing this, I don't see, okay, the Mohists is thinking about truth. Probably he think more on the usefulness, and so the dialectics probably to make it clear what is useful, what is useless. I think that's my opinion, and I don't see Mohists or has an interest to find the truth. Any comment on this? Alex, please.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere in the reading that was it about agreement and disagreement?
Hmm?
Agreement and disagreement. I think somewhere in the reading, it's talking about somewhere along the logic, like you know, if one agrees, everyone agrees on these issues, then everyone should agree. Or if you're the only one who doesn't agree, so let's, for example, right and wrong. If everyone agrees what's right and what's wrong, then that's in agreement. Order, disorder, if everyone agrees, then that's also an agreement, so far and so forth. So I'm just thinking if this is what he mentioned about agreement. Because if you don't agree, someone who don't agree on these things, who doesn't agree on these things, then it would be, I guess, against everything that the society believes.
Okay, yeah, I think I know what you are talking about. You are talking about on the first part. That I will include in the next week, which is the state of nature argument. He talking about the virtue. So here is he talk about dialectic, and then he talk about the agreement, and the agreement is related to the virtue. So that in his argument is, since they have, if they have one people, they have one standard. They have two people, they have two standards. Then they have many people, they have many standards. Then how do we agree, okay, on what's the standard? So then he, remember his the writing on the go to the superiority. Okay, so people in the higher position, they have higher virtue, and then that's the government. So again, that's his related to his state of nature argument. So that's my answer on this one, and I believe that's why I put all the examples in the later part for the next week. So if you go through this one, you will see the connection of the his political argument with his logic, and that's just
I think I found it's on page 126. It says there is disagreement when one says it's an ox and another says it's a horse. When neither of them wins, there is no argument. Argument is that in which one person says the thing is so and another says it is not so. The one who is right will win.
Oh, okay. I know. I know what. So you are reading the part. He is talking about the reason is given under argument.
Yes, it's the second canon. It says to say that in argument there's no winner is necessarily incorrect. So
yeah, I think that's the part that you are talking about, the on the exposition, right? The
yes.
reason, the argument. Yeah,
Yes.
he's talking about, yes, you are right. He's talking about this part and what's the agreement, what's the disagreement. So you try to answer the question about the truth. You think about he is concerning about the truth, which is agreement.
I think for him the truth means that if there's an agreement.
Okay, I take it. Yeah, I take it. It's the meaning of truth, but the truth that
right.
So in his writing, so what in anybody's writing, I think.
Right,
so,
like the truth of the truth of the truth. For him, if there's an agreement, that's enough for Mohists. But from the Western philosophy point of view, like you mentioned Plato, what is the truth? Just because everyone agrees doesn't mean that it's the truth. But in Mohist view, that's how they achieve, I guess, the truth.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very, well, I would say good point, because I agree. So yeah, in Plato, we're not happy on the 99% agree. He's looking for the real, the truth. And then in Mohism, probably agreement is good enough to call truth. And then how to reach the agreement, and that we'll talk about next part, is not go to the majority, it go to the superior, I think, the people in the higher position. So, okay, good comment, thank you. We have a...
So if truth is not determined by the majority, it's determined by the superior?
Yes. Not the truth, the virtue. Okay.
Okay.
The virtue. Yeah, we will talk about next week. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's have, let's see, I lost the order. Brian, Kevin, and Karen. Okay, Brian, please.
So I think this is a great slide, and I like the word dialectics. I have looked at dialectics in the Greek context, and I think whoever did this translation, I think did a great job picking that word. It's important to understand that dialectics is used in the context of discussion or argument, persuasion. And that is distinguished from rhetoric. Most people clearly in the West, or who've heard about this, think, yeah, rhetoric is the way to convince or persuade someone else. That is true, but rhetoric involves emotion, convincing, persuading someone, including emotion. Dialectics is convincing, persuading someone without emotion. And these are great categories here to discuss a topic. And as Alex said, to discuss a topic and reach agreement without emotion. So these are great categories or classifications, ways to think about an issue or a matter and to arrive at an outcome that's not just agreeable to them, but is also, if you will, correct or reasonable. So let's say that two people are discussing and they might reach an agreement, but all they've thought about is order and disorder, or similarity and difference. They've reached an agreement, but that agreement might not be, quote, correct from the perspective of this list from these dialectics. So if you want to have if you want an understanding that's not only agreed but correct, I think what this list suggests to me is that the people should consider all of these 8 categories before they feel like they have a reasonable agreement.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let me make a quick comment on this. Okay, this comment is based on Aristotle's writing, Rhetoric. Okay,
right.
Aristotle make it very clear. Okay, in his Rhetoric, he's talking about dialectics. The purpose of dialectics is finding the truth. Rhetoric, the purpose is persuasion. Okay, so that's the definition of Aristotle. And the sophistry, that's another thing. So these 3 terms, sophistry, dialectics, and rhetoric, is a confusing term. They have an overlap, and it depends on the philosophers, and you can use the different way. And then in the Mohism, you can see this word, bian, okay, we translate as dialectics. That probably also include, okay, rhetoric, because they have no other thing to talk about rhetoric. And another word we use at the canon 2, okay, this word called sui, okay, sui, okay, we translate as reason, but it also include some dialectics or some argument, rhetoric sense here. So that's I think in Mohism and the Western philosophers, they are talking about the same thing, but they just put a different category. And that's why sometimes get very confused. We know we are talking about the same thing, but sometimes, it's confusing. And then that's why I make this chapter difficult to read. I think most of people agree this chapter is difficult to read.
Can we go back to that slide, to the 2 earlier?
Which one? This one?
Right there, right there. Okay, I don't disagree with what you're saying about dialectic and rhetoric. I do think that even Aristotle would point out that you use emotion in rhetoric.
Mhm.
And if you want to eliminate the emotion, you try to use a dialectic. But that's the problem is you don't know you want to be careful about what you don't always realize what's emotional and what's not emotional when you're in these arguments. No winner, it says here, no winner in an argument. This statement is incorrect, right? This dialectic would go on to say, this dialectic or the idea of dialectic suggests that, yeah, there is a winner in each argument, but the winner might be incorrect. The winner might be incorrect. And the winner is incorrect if they haven't thought through all the dialectics.
Okay, thank you. I got your point. I think that Mohists has no further writing on this, so I will take your explanation. Yeah. One thing, the quick mention about Aristotle's rhetoric. I read this one a few months ago, and I was shocked by the writing. They have big portion is talk about human psychology. Okay, so a lot of part talk about emotion, the feeling, the speaker, the tone, all this kind of thing. So you are right. The emotion is in the rhetoric part on the at least on the Aristotle's definition. Next one is Kevin, please.
Yeah, first, I will answer your question. It's what's the truth about that? It's I would say why you see the first they would be that's make clear distinction. Last slide, and between right and wrong. Yeah, I would say right. It's if you both party or multiple party agree, agree this is right, or we agreed. More important, what's the truth? Because your truth maybe or not another truth. How about the fake truth? You see that's ox or horse. Can I fake the ox? Actually it's a horse. Or another way wrong. I kind of fake the horse with ox, make it same or different. So I would say it's especially dialectics. The agreement, that's true. Can you find something in common, agreeable?
Yeah,
And
I think.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and then one thing I'd like to mention is Kevin probably read the original text because ox and the horse and the dog. Okay, that's the example Mohists like to use. So it's very unusual in the ancient Chinese writing because they pick up some common animal instead of to pick up the person, okay, the real case to use it. So whenever you see the horse, ox, something you can consider as like in the Western world, you can say X, Y, and Z. That means like something, this. So you can see how their mind is different than other Chinese philosophers. They try to separate from the real world and talk about the pure logic on this part. Yeah. Karen, please.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to echo things that Alex and Kevin said, but when I read this, I was very struck by how there seemed to be a focus on the truth. So I'm surprised that you're suggesting that there isn't, and it's just because of the ways that they're arguing against the alternative views by pointing out contradictions. And because if I read the previous chapter to this, and it suggested that there was a view that, look, let's imagine that you and I disagree and I convince you, but we're still then just in the realm of people having opinions. And there's no reason to think that we've somehow, because I've convinced you, gotten to the truth beyond person's opinions. It's just now we have the same personal limited opinion. So there's no winners because nothing's really changed in response to our relationship to things as they are, independent of our individual personal opinions. We're just changing them. And so here, so there's no winner, because even if we all agree at the end of the day, how's that a different situation, right? We're still, it just means we all have the same minimal independent, opinion, limited perspective. So if this is a response to that view, the winner being everyone agreeing isn't a response, because that's something that the previous view allowed for and said complete agreement isn't winning, right? I don't see in this any response to that, response to the challenge that agreement doesn't mean winning. What I see is this focus on a different kind of agreement, which is an agreement between actuality and the name. So there's the agreement between you and me as people in the dialectic, and then there's an agreement between the language we're using and the things we're applying the language to. And it's that kind of agreement that I think is focusing on, which seems more close to a sort of Western notion of a correspondence with truth.
Okay, so got your point. Thank you. Yeah, I probably been so-called misled or being influenced or focused a lot on this number 5.
Right.
Because like talk about the beneficial and harmful. Okay, I think this word keeps showing up in the Mohism writing. That's why I would like to have a further discussion next week about his experience thinking. The similar part about him and Jeremy Bentham is they are so radical. Okay, Benjamin Saunders, to me, Bentham is not only utilitarian, he is radical. Okay, his radicality is important because one principle for everything. To me, that's a personal feeling. Mohists have the same flavor. The utilitarian, the radical utilitarian, he used utilitarian to explain all the virtue, okay, all the government, and even for the religion. Okay, the purpose of he believe God, ghost, heaven is the ghost will punish the bad people and reward the good people, which benefit to the world, okay, to the majority of the people. So I think that's the part I'm saying is so interesting between him and Jeremy Bentham, because the radicality, not only the truth. So thank you for mentioning on the truth part. That's worth a lot to think about. And we have running out of time. So I have one more slide to cover. So I will end with Hume and Kevin. I'm doing well on the time. So just remind everyone, I have one more slide to show. So Hume, please.
Yeah. So basically, I'm trying to figure out, how do we come to the truth? Is truth an empirical thing, or is truth an emotional feeling? Because I mean, you can have a emotional feeling about something, but it does, it may not make sense. And how do you make sense of the situation? It depends on whether you are emotional about it or whether you're willing to look at some facts. Like if we're trying to determine the reason or why a person is guilty, right? We may go by our sentiments, right, about the person, but then because we may have known the person impressed us with their rhetoric and everything else, but then we don't know the truth about the person. The person could have a side to them and they did something, but because we thought of them in such a high regard, we couldn't believe that they did this thing, which is this is the truth, right? So how do we I think we have to try to, in my opinion, to try to stay with the dialectic as opposed to the rhetoric,
Yep. Thank you, Hume. Yeah. That about truth, that's a big issue. But yeah, thank you for sharing.
It's a big issue. It's definitely a big issue.
It's the only issue we talk about philosophy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Kevin, please.
I try to be quick. I very values no winner in argument or dialectic. It's even this they not agree. You can Yeah.
You mean
No winner in an argument. If you keep in practice, you have to find a solution. You want to keep argument until philosophy, no winner. For example, in Canada, we call the trackers in convoy. Who is it? What's the truth? You cannot keep digging that down. You have to agree with something. Then, yeah, if you keep doing argument, it's keep it going on and on forever.
Okay, so yeah, so you disagree on Mohists. So you say
Yeah,
no.
if you I would say you think those words, think though can be named, not the eternal though. This name thing like here, same thing happen here.
That's exactly what the Mohists argue against the Taoism and the Confucius, right? Because both Taoism and the Confucius doesn't like to argue, but Mohists is talking about the reason is given under argument. That means during this dialectic process, you find the reason, and then that's his point. I'm not argue against you. I just express what Mohists' position and why he writes this one exactly for the reason for Confucianism and Taoism, and also the school of names. Madeline, I put you on hold for 1 minute, then let me finish the last slide. Okay, so because that's the last part of, then they have a lot of things. I think we can do it next week. Okay, minor illustration, they talk about proposition, right? We all know proposition is subject, which is actuality in Chinese, and the predicate, which is name, right? So he talking about use name to illustrate the actuality. Use proposition to express your ideas. Okay, just reminder, what is a proposition? Proposition means some statement have the truth or false, right? You can say this is a cup, it can be true or false. But open the door is not proposition. It's no truth or false. And then he's talking about this. The reason is to set forth the cause. And then he talked about 以类取, 以类语. He already talking about the deduction and induction, right? His word is, if you already have the category, okay, that's the set and the subset concept, right? You have a set, if from the set you take something, okay? That's the deduction. And he also talk about the reason is the dialectic is using the induction. That means you scan, you experience everything, you sample it, and you group them together, which is induction method. So basically, it of course is not as sophisticated, as complete as today's logic, but basically he already in 2,500 years ago, he already had this kind of concept and try to build a system to organize all this kind of logic in the modern analytical philosophy. Okay, that's the very unusual, very special. I think it's not only unusual in Chinese philosophy, also very unusual in around the world. Only thing you can see is Plato, Aristotle. They try to do this one, and they take totally different approach. Okay, that's I like mentioned is the difficult part of Plato and Aristotle is they write too much. You have to read a lot. But in the Mohists, is they write too little. They only a few sentences, and we have to think a lot to think about why they talk about this and what that means. Yeah, Madeline, please.
Yes, well, I'm glad we got to this slide. It's kind of the most interesting one. I really like these people because they concluded that the real are the things that are instantiated in the world, whereas Plato concluded that his insubstantial forms are what is real, which makes Plato very confusing for most of us, how we regard reality and not reality. And I liked
than I thought. Oh my goodness.
I liked the example in the book where in the reading that we did for today about imitation,
Okay.
that an experiment which would go in this section. I'm just not sure which one. No, that one that the last slide you had up, that imitation. Oh, I see. Is
Yeah, on this
so
one.
when you're doing an experiment, you're imitating the idea in reality. And I thought that was a very interesting way to put the relationship between, I mean, you could call the idea you could almost call the idea the name, and the experiment, the actuality. And so you're trying out different actualities to fit the name that you have in your mind.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we kind of finish today's session. Okay, it's a 2 hour, 4 minutes overtime. Okay, so this part I didn't show. Okay, but I think it's proper to do it the next week, because there's another 7 methods of dialectics. You can see it. And then I think I hope it's not too boring for today's meetup, because it's pure logic, and then it probably is the only one happen, and that's the only thing can happen, only in the later Mohism in this part. So that's I have to say for today. Is any final words about today? Any comment on today's subject, and any suggestion? Because I find out today is a little bit different and probably difficult. I don't know. So, and I find out even when I read it, I find out it's hard to make it clear, in this way. So next week, I think I will use the real example, which would, and by recording the logic covered today. Kevin, please.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I can learn a lot from at least 2 points. One is from the second slide about the Qu and Yu. You can imagine that from individual with community. I get something from community, from get, from English. Then also I can give Yu to the use lay, right? That's like use the computer math term, use set to individual element. That's what I'm very interested. I'm very impressed about the tone. The same, that slide, grab me. You talk about the 2 names, actually it's one thing. We use a different language. We can English or Chinese or French. You can use different. Also, same language, different name. You name actually talk about the same thing. That's what the name sometimes is confusing. And you also mentioned one is part and whole about the tone, and the 2 party it's need agreements, and eventually you a big great same needs. Yeah, that's yes. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you everyone. And
Thank you, Jason. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. This was
Thank you so
fun.
much.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, see you next week. Yeah.
Take good care of your head.
Yeah, get well very soon. Okay.
All right, see you.